All right, why don't we get started? Hearing a little bit of an echo, but hopefully that's not heard by others. So, welcome everyone to the latest of our lectures that pertain to the Armenian genocide and in recognition of the genocide which took place between 1915 and 1918. My name is Professor Ann Karagosian. I'm the director of the Promise Armenian Institute. It's my delight and pleasure to welcome you to this lecture to be delivered by Dr. Anna Aleksanyan on the subject of the right to the first night and sexual violence against Armenian genocide in the 19th century. Dr. Anna Aleksanyan is one of our postdocs in the UCLA Armenian Genocide Research Program within the Promise Armenian Institute. Her lecture will discuss provincial Armenian life in the 19th century and the different types of sexual violence that took place in the run-up to the Armenian genocide, including the so-called right of the first night. Such violence was documented to take place in petitions and other correspondence communicated by Ottoman Armenians to the Patriarchate in Constantinople and to the Catholicos of all Armenians in Ējmiatsin. We are grateful to Dr. Aleksanyan for her meticulous research on this important subject and for speaking to us this evening on her impactful research. I am also pleased to be joined in our program today by the organizer of the event, Dr. Taner Akçam, who is Dr. Aleksanyan's mentor and was her PhD advisor at Clark University. Dr. Akçam will be introducing the subject and context and speaker shortly. I'm also pleased to note that our event today is co-sponsored by the UCLA Radicalization Chair in Armenian Studies, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, or NASR, the Radicalization Museum, and the newly endowed Promise Chair in Armenian Music, Arts, and Culture at UCLA. We are grateful for the support of these co-sponsors. And on behalf of the UCLA co-sponsors, I would like to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the indigenous Gabrielino Tongva peoples. It is a privilege for our institution to acknowledge the history of the land on which we are established. Before we move on with our program and the introduction of our speaker, let me mention a few procedural items. First, let me note that this event is being recorded for future viewing on our Promise Armenian Institute YouTube channel, which is in fact visible now on YouTube. Second, for those of you here in the audience, when the lecture is finished, please feel free to pose questions and we will try to get to as many of them as practical. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our inaugural director of our Promise Armenian Institute's Armenian Genocide Research Program, Dr. Taner Akçam. Dr. Akçam came to us at UCLA approximately 2 years ago and has initiated a series of important conferences and lectures, including this one. Dr. Akçam, as you probably are aware, was previously a professor at Clark University in Massachusetts, where for many years he was the Kalustyan and Mugar Professor of Modern Armenian History and Genocide at the Strassler Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. So, Taner, I will now turn the event over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne, for the introduction, and good afternoon or good morning or good night, wherever you are in the world and watching us live. I want to give you a context of this talk, how it came about. Anna Aleksanyan, I know her since I cannot remember. In Istanbul, we met at a conference, and she presented a paper there that struck me really, and I wanted her to my program, and she came, and she worked on gender and genocide, and I'm hoping that she's getting ready her book to be published. and she's going to talk on a very important topic. So what is this topic all about and how it came out? The story is, I cannot change the slides. How can I move the slides? Oh yeah, I know that. Thank you. It started everything 2025. I published a Turkish book, A Short History of Armenian Genocide. The book has received a lot of publicity. I had many interviews with different newspapers. In an interview with an online newspaper, Gazete Duvar, on April 20, 2021, I was asked about the social and legal problems Armenian was facing regarding the book. And I answered, quote, the social and legal inequalities were so stark as to be nearly unbelievable. We might compare them, this social situation of Armenians, to those of the former racist regime in South Africa. Armenians and Assyrians had the status of second-class citizens. This presented no problem so long as they didn't demand to change that status. It was like it is for the Kurds today, who are demanding to live in every sense on honorable, equal, and equally valued level with Turks. Let me give you a frightening example, I said in that interview. In the 19th century feudal society of the Kurdish regions, for instance, the Kurdish Agas exercised their right of first night over Armenian newlyweds. About that, the Armenians were also forced to pay double taxes. They would pay their normal taxes to the state and also to pay a tax to the Kurdish feudal leaders of the region known as the Hafir. And they Armenians weren't considered full citizens. Their testimony was not accepted in the courts. Very well known general issues, and this reference to the right of the first night was not in my book. I just gave this as one of the several examples. And the reaction to my claim was great and immediate. A public statement signed by 134 Kurdish intellectuals was issued, calling me to apologize. Within the statement, the following passage is important. They say, until now, a great many things have been said within both the Kurdish and Armenian communities, both positive and negative, both true and false in regard to their relations. But such a thing, the right of first night, as this has never been before voiced or written. While Taner Akçam may claim to have certain documents and to have received information from certain sources, that which was mentioned is both far from being scientific or persuasive and contrary to the historical and social values of both people. It is impossible, they continued, to imagine a situation such as that depicted existing within the traditions of Kurdish and Armenian societies. In regard to the claim under discussion, Professor Akçam has shown as his source the book titled Kurdistan and Kurdish Problem from Lazarev, a Kurdish Kurdiologist from Russia, and then the declaration continues, Temure Halil, the Kurdish author who translated Lazarev's work into Kurdish, has described Akçam's claim as a fabrication and baseless and as a conscious distortion. This is far from scientific. Due to this false and groundless claim, we condemn Taner Akçam and call on him to apologize to both peoples. End of quote. Within a short period, the controversy turned into a campaign for the public lynching without exaggeration. I was accused of having called the Kurds dishonorable, of secretly being in the service of Turkish state, not of being thereby asked with declaring the Kurds responsible for the Armenian genocide. Even I was called a little Enver. in reference to the Union Triumph Enver Pasha. I responded to these attacks in several different explanations, and at the end, I subsequently assembled in a single article all of the information on the right of the first night that was found in them. This was around 30, 35, several sources, Armenian, Turkish, Ottoman, German, English sources. The article was less an analysis and evaluation of these sources than an inventory of the information found within them. And Anna Aleksanyan was working during that period on sexual violence and Armenian genocide, and she was very helpful in my research during that time, and she continued working on that subject. And at the end, for her PhD, she excluded the materials she has compiled related to 19th century. And this controversy in Turkey gave an opportunity to Anna to continue working on that subject. And this is how this really talk came about and how the possible article, we are hoping that in coming months will be published in one of the scholarly journal. And this is now what Anna is working about. So please join me in welcoming Anna for her lecture. Anna.
Thank you, Professor Akşam, and thank you, Professor Dr. Karagözyan, for introduction and for this opportunity to be here and to present my research. So this is from Professor's slides.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to show them.
Yeah. So I will start with the topic of my dissertation that I worked on for many years, which titled "Gendered Aspects of the Armenian Genocide in the Experiences of its Victimized Females." And you see the dates, 1914 and 1918. But those of you who studied gender knows that before going there, so this thesis, my thesis, and my main hypothesis in this thesis, my thesis were focused on women. And the hypothesis was that Armenian women were experienced sexual violence during the Armenian genocide. It was systematic, it was widespread. And because what they went through, it changed Armenian intergender dimensions within Armenian community. Armenian women became empowered. They became leading among their communities. And because of these changes, Armenian nation could survive. So basically, this is the conclusion of my dissertation. And of course, to understand who were these Armenian women before the genocide, what were the gender dimensions within Armenian community, I had to study Armenian women before the genocide. So it was important. And who were these women, if not women in the Ottoman provinces? Because they were the ones who went through the genocide and who were subjected to all these atrocities during the genocide. So for where to find the information, the sources about Armenian women in provinces, you would ask, because in the literature that is known, most of the literature that focus on women of the Ottoman Empire, and Professor Bilal is here, and she's one of the authors of such a work, is focused on Istanbul Armenian women. So provincial Armenian women were in the periphery of many scholars. And those who focused on Ottoman Armenian women movement and feminism, and they mostly worked on Istanbul Armenians. And when I started my research, I was looking into province, and I had to go to the archives and dig in those archives to find out information about the provincial Armenian women. And it surprised me how many materials could be found on those archives. And these are the short list of those archives that I went through to find out the information. The Institute of Ancient Manuscripts of the Master of Martial Arts, Martin Adaran, was a great source because Armenians were sending their letters and petitions to not only to the Patriarchate of Constantinople, but to the Armenian Catholicos of all Armenians in Ējmiatsin, because they were seeking also his help. And because of that, many stories of these women ended up in the pages of those letters and reports. Then I worked on Nubar Library in Paris, where the archive, the partial archive of Patriarchate of Constantinople is kept, and we see all the reports that were sent from the provinces to the Patriarchate, and the Armenian National Library was a great source for the old books that were published in the 19th century on the topic. Of course, Machitai's Congregation Library archives in Vienna, they are keeping the largest collection of provincial Armenian press, which was important for my research. And interestingly, now the handwritten press from the provinces and Armenian women journals that were unknown, at least for me, I found out in those in that archive. And of course, archives of Museum of Literature and Arts of the Challenge in Yerevan, where, for example, the private archives of Garagin Selvanzetian's many letters of Khrimian Hayrik and all the prominent Armenian decision makers of that time is kept. So this is basically the archives. As it was said, so what my research showed that throughout the 19th century, the Patriarchate in Constantinople, as well as the Catholicos of all Armenians in Ējmiatsin, received petitions and other correspondences from the Ottoman Armenian provinces. So the petitions aim to seek justice from Ottoman government, which local administrations and courts were unable or unwilling to provide. These petitions describe the details of all known episodes of violence or exploitation to which provincial Armenians were going to. But most importantly, which I found, alongside with financial and physical oppression, the question of patvo brnabarutyun, which is, if I translate it from Armenian, is rape of dignity, was there. So in the reports that were sent, this was mentioned, and it was almost in every petition. But here is some of the archival materials that I have worked on. So these petitions, these letters, these, they came from different people, from different, you can tell from the language that they use, from the dialect that they use. And you even can tell, so because of the use of Turkish and Kurdish words in the text, you can say that it was not written by someone who is educated in Istanbul and, selectively or in purpose is writing this petitions, let's say. And sometimes it is hard to understand what the content, but women and violence, kidnapping, raping, and the raping at the patvo brnabarutyun is obviously there. So what I found out that sexual violence in all its forms was present in the lives of provincial Armenians as a direct way of controlling and enslaving women's bodies and their lives, controlling their community reproduction and everyday life through this humiliation. If I would conclude what I found in general in those archives, this would be this. But was this the only, was this subject was discussed or raised only in those written petitions? No, it wasn't. It was also published in the press and in the books. The purpose of publishing this, I will discuss it also, but it was so shocking. It was so shocking for Armenian communities. Those who discovered what was going on in the provinces by reading these reports, by reading these complaints, that they tried to find a solution to stop it, to resist it, and to help Armenian communities to recover. And because many Armenians who suffered this kind of violence, sexual violence particularly, passively resisted it, which is they were leaving their homeland, they were leaving their mush, they were leaving those places, those villages, or even converting to Islam to avoid this kind of violence. And they would read it, they would write it about this, saying that we made this decision to save the dignity of our family, to save our children, our girls, and or they would even ask Catholicos to send them money to escape those villages to come to Russian Armenia in order to save the dignity, in order to be saved, in order to save their women and their girls. And but it stayed within the walls of the Armenian church leaders until they have decided to make it public. So this was a decision that was made by this man, Garikin Servanzetian, mainly by him. And I don't think that he needs an introduction because those who study the Armenian history knows Garikin Servanzetian. He was the beloved student of Makartich Kharimyan Hayrik. Kharimyan Hayrik, he established this school in Baragabang, and Servanzetian graduated from that school. They were very close. When he went to that school, he was already 20 years old. So they were friends, and they had this very interesting relations. And when Makartich Kharimyan was appointed to to become the prelacy, the head of the Mush prelacy, he took with him Garikin Servanzetian. So Garikin went there, and even though both of them, both Ėjmiatsin and Garagin-Sarvanzitians, they were from province. They knew province better than any Armenian decision maker back then in Istanbul, because many Armenian decision makers in Istanbul didn't know really what was going on in the province. So, but these two men, they came from province, they worked in province, and they knew the wounds of the province. But when they moved to Mush, this is when the entire picture of so-called Kurdish and Muslim atrocities opened. Because Mush Armenians were the most suppressed among other provincial Armenians. So it was obvious that they have work to do. And immediately they started to publish a newspaper, which is, but I will talk about it later, but they have started this publication of a newspaper, and also they have started to collect an evidence about these crimes, because Armenians believe, especially after the constitution era, they believe that they can avoid so-called local Muslim courts, which were unjust towards them because of the system, because that the Christians could not be victim. They could not be. I forgot the name. So their testimony was not valued they could not testify in the Muslim court. So that was the main rule. So, and because they could not testify, they could not rely on the local Muslim court. So, and they thought that they can bring this into the Ottoman government attention through these petitions also. This was kind of a system that Armenians used to raise their voices, what was going on with them. And so this is why Եղմյան Հայրիկ, Մգրտիչ Եղմյան sent Garagin-Sarvanzitians to gather the evidence, which he was going to present to local authorities, and also in the future sent to Istanbul. After working and living among the Kurdish tribes and gathering the information, Garagin-Sarvanzitians published. He prepared this report, which is known as Մշեցոց վրա ընդհանուր տեսություն, general overview on Masheti Armenians. This would be the translation. He sent it to Եղմյան and asked him to allow him to publish it, because he said this is important to make it known for larger public what is going on. And Եղmյան said yes, and he sent this text to Istanbul. There was an Armenian Turkish newspaper, Mazumei Evker, and in that newspaper in 1869, in several issues, this report was published. So in his report, Armenian women, Masheti Armenian women, are innocent. So he basically wrote about the life of Masheti Armenian women, how they were suffering, and not only in the hands of Kurds, but also he was trying to give the content why it was happening. And of course, the problem that he and Եղմյան Հայրիկ figured out was that many men from those areas, Armenian men, were forced to leave their homes to go to work in larger cities to gain some money. So they were vandals, They were immigrant workers, and they left their families behind. And the Armenian women were the ones who were responsible to care for families. Those pandukhs would not come back. The money they would send would be plundered by local Kurds. And at the end, they were enslaved by those Kurdish tribes who were living next by. And interestingly enough, many Armenian villages this way, not having proper Armenian men to protect them, became also slaves, literally slaves of those Kurdish aghas. And being slave also, of course, meant that these women and girls were sexually assaulted by their so-called owners, so-called aghas. What is important in this report that Garakin Sarvanzatian uses the wording. He did this report in among the Kurdish Gibranlı tribe. It is a known tribe, and he writes that, are there any Armenian women or girls who they did not rape? He is asking, as they perpetrators, because he lived among them. So as they say, without a doubt, the right of the first night of every newly wedded belongs to the sheikh and the Kurdish base. So this is not my wording, and this is the wording, the right of the first night. This is the wording of Garakin Sarvanzatian. And I guess because being a well-educated person and being familiar with the history of Europe, Middle Ages, the feudals and the relations between those feudals and their subjects who were exercising the right of the first night. Maybe this is why he refers this, he gives this, but this is his wording, Garakin Sarvanzatian's wording. Then he continues, describing other types of sexual violence, which was publicly raping Armenian women to humiliate the community. Sometimes he would say that they would rape these women in front of their community, in front of their husbands, and also these Kurdish he gives names of perpetrators, of course, and he says that they would, would be proud of having in their disposal 40, 50 Armenian women. So this was the situation. And of course, he was asking the general question, so what we can do to stop this? How we can help these women, what we can do to stop it, and what we can do to punish these perpetrators, because at the end of the day, the punishment was important. But he also emphasizes that the local government, the representatives, they were collaborating with perpetrators. So they would, even if the police would chase them, at the end of the day, they would be freed and they would be supported and they would continue their crimes openly, having that support. So this is also very important. So, and then he goes back to Masheti Armenian pandukhts, those workers who were, wasting, and again, I'm using his words, wasting their lives in big cities such as Istanbul and Tiflis and later Baku. So he would say that these men should come back. We have to create that environment for them to come back to work in their lands, to protect their women. And he said and he brings this again, it is from that very article, the song, he says, the famous song of every Masheti pandukht, who would sing and say that we do not take a wife for ourselves. We do not give birth to boys and girls for the Armenian nation. We do not build houses for ourselves. We do not sow and reap bread for ourselves. We do not live for ourselves. Everything they did, it was plundered and taken by local Kurdish and other Kurds and other Muslims who would attack them. So Garagi Sarvanzetyan's, oh yeah, I forgot an important detail. This Mazumei Efker article was a shock. It was a shock not only for Armenian community, but also for the Turkish authorities. So Turkish government was in shock. And according to the archival documents and correspondence between the Armenian clergies, Ali Pasha, who was the foreign minister of that time, was so mad at Sarvanzetyan that he was intending to shut down the Mazumei Efker and to punish the editor of this magazine. He said, this is unknown, it is not happening, because we have to keep in mind that this was not legal, that the Kurds could do. It was illegal, and they were shocked that this was happening. But at the same time, before doing that, he sent a letter to the Erzurum Vali asking him to, to find out if whatever Sarvanzetyan says is true. And because Sarvanzetyan gave perpetrators names, it was easy to follow up and find out if it was actually happening. And the Erzurum Vali wrote him back that everything that Sarvanzetyan published is truth. So this was something that Magartish Kharimian would use again to raise an awareness what is happening and to seek the help of the Ottoman government. Now, this was not the first time that Garik in Sarvanzetyan would publish about the life and the suppression of provincial Armenians. While with Kharimian, they were publishing Artvik Daranoi, I have already mentioned. The translation would be Little Eagle of Daron. And so it was published between 1863 and 1865. And in this short period of time, you would see how Sarvanzetyan's raising the question of, again, the situation of Masheti Armenians and the gender issues that existed, and would try to find solutions or try to seek attention of border like Armenian communities, and this was somehow a platform to share the information, the knowledge about what was going on. He even published a collective let's say report of, it's not a report, it's Armenian Masheti Armenians were the letter that Masheti Armenians were asking from Patriarchate and from the Ottoman state and from their Sultan to intervene and to help them to solve the situation. And obviously, it was done by Sarvanzetyan again to make it public. So making it public and seeking for solutions was something that started with Kharimian Hayrik. Kharimian is a prominent figure in Armenian history. He's known as Hayrik because people loved him. He actually was very close to common people. he knew their, needs, and he served as a prelate of Mush between 1862 and 1869, and then he was selected to become a patriarch of Constantinople, and he had to leave Mush, and this is when he comes to Istanbul, Constantinople, and he starts to push for this collecting the evidence about this violence and to reporting it to the Ottoman state. So he would send letters to all the prelacies of Ottoman Armenian in the Ottoman Armenian provinces, and he would ask to send extensive, their notes and the reports. And this is just one example from those reports, which I found in Matenadaran. It was dated in November 10, 1870, and sent from Grigory Zvartapet Ahvanyans. So again, it was describing the situation of Armenians in the Mush and the sexual violence. And I have a quote, and this is by the way, this is from the document, the original document that I have. I took this quote, and again, Grigory Zvartapet invites readers' attention to the fact of sexual violence. He says, but the most insulting for all humanity is the point of witnessing honorable married Armenian brides and girls raised under the holy cover, today becoming naked concubines in the households of Hafirs. I will talk about the Hafir a bit later. For days they do the service of raking wheat, washing the clothes, and patching them while silently crying. And they will work naked and barefoot in the sun and toil for weeks to plow their fields, the fields of their aghas. So again, the Hafir system that was existed only in certain areas of the Armenian provinces was, as Professor Akçam mentioned, the system of so-called the Kurdish way of feudal system that existed among Armenian peasants and Kurdish aghas. And because this peasants were their slaves, they were forced to work there. And again, of course, the sexual violence was there. So it was unavoidable, let's say. When Ējmiatsin became the Patriarch of Constantinople, he pushed, as I said, to collect these, reports and to present it to the Sovereign Porte or the Ottoman government through those Armenian officials who work for the Ottoman government. And it is interesting that some of those officials who work there, they would also write in their memoirs how this system was working, how they received these petitions, and how they tried to bring the issue to the government, and how every time government either ignoring or not responding to them. And what was decided? It was decided that there were so many petitions coming, so it was decided that the special committee will be formed to handle these petitions. The committee was actually headed by the brnabarutyun, who would become the Armenian Patriarch after Kırımen Hayrik. And by gathering all this information, Armenians published it in 1876. So what is interesting about this Dergagir, or about this book that it has only few cases mentioning the sexual violence. And it raised the questions among those who read the report, questioning the report, and even an Armenian intellectual and historian, Rafi, asks this in his response to this, report, saying that why you write so little about what is happening with women and girls? Why you are not reporting the real cases? But why is an interesting question, and it is not only related to Armenians. When it comes to sexual violence, even today, it is very hard to get a confession from the perpetrators and even from victims to report such a crime. This is something that stigmatizes victims, and this is something that not easy to talk about. And it was no different for not only for Armenian women, but for Ottoman women in general. And I wanted to mention that the scholar who worked on the slavery in the late Ottoman Empire, Zilfi, who points out that in every century, one of the recruiting abuses of the rural populace was the kidnapping of free subjects, Muslims and non-Muslims. Those kidnapped females not only became victims of false enslavement, but first and foremost victims of sexual violence. When the victim was a Muslim and she managed to find a way to alert the authorities, all was not lost for her. Some managed to take their status known, but exactly how they did so and how many others remained, it's beyond recovery, she said. And keeping this in mind, I was thinking about Armenian women who became victims of such crimes, sexual violence and forced enslavement and kidnapping. Who would find them and who would bring them back? This is another issue. So what we have is that many who were kidnapped, who were raped, they didn't believe in justice, and most of them committed suicide. This is what we read in the Armenian literature. And it was something that was true not only for Armenians, but also for Muslims. So it was a general gender issue, women issue. So in later years, Khrimian and then Vartabedian Armenian patriarchs would send the priest to collect the information, which again would be published in different books in 1870s, in 1880s, and well, this is one of the examples from Nathanyan, well-known Armenian clergy who traveled throughout the Armenian provinces and collected all the evidence. And of course, in his book, we read pages and pages and pages about the suppression and sexual violence. But nothing was happening. And Armenians try to find a solution to solve this. It was a violence which was going on for almost 20 years, and it was important for Armenians to find a way to stop it. And how? First, they tried throughout the petitions, throughout to bringing the attention of the Ottoman government, hoping that Ottoman government would intervene, would stop this violence. But when they realized that this is not going to happen and the Ottoman government is working with perpetrators, this is when they became more radical. This is when they decided that we have to protect ourselves. And this is when the secret Armenian so-called organizations emerged to solve this problem, to give a solution to this problem. And they became more popular among Ottoman provincial Armenians because of also this reason. Because Armenian men would go and become a member of a secret radical organization or revolutionary organization in order to gain a weapon or a protection from those. And we see how it is changes in 1870s. The dynamics would change. So Armenians would start secretly meeting, they would punish perpetrators, they would assassinate perpetrators, and the picture would change. The general picture in the region would change. So what couldn't do Armenian clergies and the decision makers, those in power, by seeking the help of the state, it was done by revolutionaries. And in 1880s, late 1880s, we see that some Kurdish chieftains were not even allowed to enter to the Armenian village. They couldn't enter the Armenian village unless they would have armed group of 50 people who would come, who would attack, and they knew if the men were, going to resist or not. By the way, women as well. I chose this picture, which was taken in 1910 by an Armenian priest who visited Mush region, an Armenian woman with a gun, with her son, ready to protect her body, her dignity, and the life of her son. And also, but the Kurds didn't give up the idea that, now they don't have their Armenian slaves. They would also fight back. And here we have the famous story of Musabek and Gulizar, when in 1889, a Kurdish sheikh named Musabek would attack a big house of Mihran of Mush. And by the way, Mihran was a chief of his village. And because Musabek asked him to pay so-called a task, how to say them?
Texas.
Yeah, thank you. So he refused it, and of course Musabek decided that he's going to punish him, and they attack his house. And during this attack, they not only plundered the house but also kidnapped the Gulizar, an Armenian girl who was only 14 years old, but with the help of other Armenian women who were already were forcibly married to Kurds, she could make her place known to her family, who came, who fought for her, and who took Musabek to Istanbul to the court. This was the first time in the Armenian history when Armenians demonstrated to protect the dignity of Armenian woman and to bring her back. It was kind of a huge demonstration. And of course, Gulizar was returned to her community. And in the first time, in her own Masheti dialect, Gulizar sent letter of her being kidnapped, raped, and forcibly converted to one of the Russian Armenian newspapers, Akhpur, which published it. Again, making it known to the public. And she became role model for many Armenian women. And it's not coincidence that the story of Gülizar was republished in the pages of Ramanak in 1919, encouraging other Armenian women to be brave and to come back to their nation. So I understand that I don't have much time, so I will conclude here, and I will leave some time for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is a fascinating topic and fascinating documents. I think it's a lot of sense revolutionary in the sense that it was a topic 1860s within the Ottoman government as part of government policy. And the other part is also, it shows us how important this point in the emergence of Armenian revolutionary movement, which has not been really mentioned until today. But anyway, thank you so much. And there are other important questions. I will ask my question before, but maybe the floor is open. Yeah.
I have a question. You were showing at the beginning a picture of a painting, the Shamnan's painting, and you cut your lecture a little bit short. So were you going to cover that? Were you going to mention about the painting? When you just started, you had the painting, the weddings.
That
Was that?
was,
Oh, professors, I'm sorry.
but I know it's a wedding painting.
It's a wedding picture in Mush, yes.
Yes, in Mush.
The
Yeah,
painting doesn't exist, but the picture is, so that I was just curious.
yeah. No, it wasn't in my slide.
But can I, oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, you go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. What were the age group? I know they get married very young, 12 to 14 years old. So
Mhm.
average.
So it from province to province it changed, but I should say that they were getting married very young, which was traveling Armenian church. By the way, Armenian church representatives were very worried about that, and they would even try to somehow prevent it with their kanuna gigs and not allowing these marriages. But 9 years old, 12 years old, 14 years old. And, it's interesting when the schools were opening Mush in late 19th century and girls were going to school, the main concerns of parents was their age. They would say, oh, they have to graduate after 2 years, so they're going to be 14 years old. So they are old maid. Who going to marry them? Well, how you are ruining our community. So that was the main concern also, but their age was very young. Yeah.
Yes.
So out of curiosity, the so-called right to the first night, that was unique to the Kurds and
Mhm.
perpetrating that, not to the Turks.
What I have observed from my archival materials, it appeared in certain Kurdish tribes exercised it in certain places, and I only found the names of Kurdish chieftains, not the Turkish ones. I don't know. It should be studied further to find out. But what I came across, they were Kurdish Hafiz, so-called.
And was there evidence that the Ottomans, actual Turks,
Mhm.
opposed that and wanted to do away with that for whatever reason, or did they look the other way based on the documents that you?
So they looked the other way, pretending center pretended that it never happened, that Armenians falsely accusing Kurds, and the locals were very happy with that. They were collaborating, and this was the reality. So they would look away, as you said. Sorry.
I might maybe add, this has directly something to do with the local structure, social structure of the area, and Ottoman authorities. I mean, at that time, we didn't have this clear ethnic distinction between Kurds and Turks. They were all Muslims in general, and this we know a lot about this part because of the Armenian recordings in the archival material. And we don't know much what was going on in western part of Ottoman Empire. And I came across one or other issues exactly because of the feudal structure, that this praxis was also one of the ways in Mughla, Denizli, and so on in Western part. But the important thing is here, what Anna is doing, this is really untapped territory. This is really not hasn't been researched yet. This is in that sense, I consider this revolutionary, and the question that you ask must be really searched and looked into it and so on. So that
Yeah, I think Musabe is not sheikh. Musabe is a sheikh of tribe of
Yes.
Waiti.
I used Gülizar's wording here because she published her memoirs, and this is how she was referring. This is why I use that. So for her, yeah, but yeah, you're right.
and he was the feudal lord, not the sheikh.
Yeah. He was the sheikh in the eyes of those Armenian villages who were living nearby.
I mean, I have a question. It's of course so obvious that you will get this question. Why silencing on that topic until today?
It's a shame.
Why in academic world, nobody, the academician even, those who worked with these materials, they looked some of them, I mean, some of these materials. Nobody mentioned this topic.
In Rafi's books, we've seen it, Professor. In Rafi's book, in Kent, he mentioned about a family who the boy was dressed up as a girl because the boy could have been in that other
Yes.
situation. But it's a hint, you have to get it. I grew up with family, in my family side, where the men became alcoholic or gamblers. And my grandparents, first, nobody talks about it. They went to the bad places and they were soldiers. So we knew what happened to them. And I would tell Karina, "Well, these are the hidden stuff. You have to look inside because it's all quiet. Because it's a shame for them. It's their dignity. It's their pride. And for Armenian women and Armenian professors, no offense, they don't go that far. Their boundaries is closed.
So this is, I mean, there are two aspects. One is in the records. I mean, whether there are enough records, and Anna mentioned about it, and she excluded in her talk, she already found a lot of memoirs, also hinted this kind of information in the memoirs. But the interesting part, in the general academia, nobody picked up this issue. This is very interesting part.
It's Kari.
I mean, exactly, this is, I want her to respond. I mean, if we read the books related to 19th century, you will see all scholars mentions the taxation system, unjust taxation system, and court system, how unjust. You can read this kind of information in every Armenian 19th century related histories. But these individuals who were reading these materials, they came across with this sexual violence also.
Yeah, I have to give a credit to those Armenian historians who worked on a period. They would mention it within a sentence that sexual violence occurred because they could not ignore that fact that was there. They were reading the same primary sources as I read, but it was not in a bigger picture. For example, when it came to the land issue, when it came to other issues, it didn't I don't want to say it didn't matter, but it stayed in a periphery of their studies. It was not the primary target. And also, we should not forget that most historians were men, and for men, it's very. I mean, the stories of women or concerning women or their bodies of polka, it stayed again in a periphery, and this kind of studies is now became more, not only in the Armenian studies field, but in other fields as well. It's a new thing, and I hope that historians would start studying these issues. Yeah. So.
I mean, I have one question.
Of course.
I mean, it's nothing related to this, but since you're doing the research, did you come across letters from the male part who were victims, young boys?
Yes. So it is present there. There were incidents that were reported, which makes clear that young boys were also victims of sexual violence. And I came across several documents from one reason, for example, and again, as it was not reported during the Armenian genocide, which was obviously there, and we read it in the pretext of those here as well. But evidence is there, reports are there, we can study it, and we can, it's something that we should consider also studying. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Maybe just another quick question. You had mentioned, or maybe Tonger mentioned that this was kind of the beginnings of the Armenian revolutionary kind of movement when they went in and they maybe at gunpoint or whatever recovered their girls to the community. Did this become more widespread in other provinces or just the limited areas that you explored?
So the most sexual violence occurred in the Mush region, Daron. So the documents that I came across, they are mostly on Daron. And when I read the revolutionaries, they would confess that men who come to join them would say, oh, we don't care if you are Dashnak Tsagan or Henchagyan. As long as you give me weapon, as long as you protect me and my wife, I'm okay with you. So this was something, and these revolutionaries became particularly famous. I mean, they became very successful in those very regions when this kind of violence occurred. So of course, Armenians, it was as I mentioned, it was another way to protect their families. So this was the radicalization of the politics. So they would say, this is how we're going to protect. And so I didn't study other provinces, or I don't know, but for sure, Dashnak Tsagans were very famous in Van and Mush, as well as Henchagans, very successful. And
because these stories are familiar to me. My husband had a great aunt who experienced this, but not in Mush. It was in Hajin, and she was rescued as a young girl. And so I'm sure there are many more tragic stories.
Of course.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Anna. You also have the materials from the Tbilisi, where the revolutionary published newspapers and journals. It shows that it was not only a regional problem, an issue related to a certain region. The issue was elevated to the level of revolutionary propaganda. So the revolutionary were calling to Armenian young men to join them to save the life and dignity of the woman.
Yes.
Am I correct? And
yes.
This is what
And it ended up in their manifests, referring to this, that they are going to, fight for the dignity of Armenian family, Armenian women, save them from these crimes. And of course, they send their, let's say, journalists or representatives who would extensively take notes and report back to the to Tiflis, to Dashnak. I mean, you can find all these reports in Dashnak archives, and also in their Droshak in 1890s. Droshak was full of these reports, what was going on. So they would, encourage, as Professor mentioned, young men to join them, to go to Hayrenik, to go to their motherland and save people, because of this violence, many were leaving hiding. And people, those at that time, Armenian intellectuals understood. They would say that without Armenians, there is no Armenia. And for them, it was Armenia, it was homeland. And without Armenians who were leaving Armenia, there would be no Armenia. So this was the main concern. So they went there to fight for these people so that they could live in their ancestral homes. Yeah.
I have a bit of a tangential question just about the violence and the crime itself. What happened when these first nights resulted in pregnancies?
Oh, thank you for this question. Actually, the answer gives brnabarutyun, a prominent Armenian writer who published this book called Hayuhi, Armenian Woman. And he describes many of such cases and how these women would, commit suicide to end the lives of the children, but also how Armenian church would encourage them to keep babies. They would marry them in the Armenian church and convince them that after the ritual, the Christian ritual, the babies became Armenians. So this was something that accepting what happened and caring for these children and raising them as Armenians because they believe. And interestingly, so they would call the men who wanted to marry them before or their husbands, and say that yes, this is your baby.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have anything to add as a conclusion?
No, I just want to thank you all for coming here in person and virtually and listening. I usually don't read, I talk, and I want to apologize if it was like a bit of back and forth. Yeah,
That's great.
thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just say a couple of additional words. Thank you again, Anna, for an amazing talk. And we look forward to continued outstanding research by you as you continue your postdoctoral experience here. I just want to mention we have several additional events coming up, co-sponsored or sponsored by the Promise Armenian Institute. Actually, next week, Thursday, May 9 and Friday, May 10, the Aurora Humanitarian Institute and the Promise Institute for Human Rights at the UCLA Law School will be hosting the 2024 Aurora Prize events here on our campus. So this is May 9 and 10. On May 9, it will take place at our Luskin Conference Center. And May 10, there at the Hammer Museum, there will be a screening of the award-winning film Aurora's Sunrise with a discussion, including our own Professor Melissa Bilal at that event. So please take a look at our website and social media, and you'll learn about those specifics. On Wednesday, May 15 at 10 a.m. Pacific, there will be a Zoom-based webinar held in connection with the announcement of the Vahakan Dadrian Archive Project, which is co-led by our UCLA Armenian Genocide Research Program, as well as the Ararat Museum and Maggie Goshen, who is here with us. So that's on May 15. And then finally, on Thursday, May 23rd at 6 p.m. in this room, we're pleased to present a hybrid talk by our PAI Fulbright scholar, Dr. Zorab Gevorkian of the American University of Armenia, who will discuss his research on the subject of the Pearl of the Mediterranean, Cilician Armenia at the crossroads of East-West trade. So finally, let me thank all those who were involved in coordinating this event, Dr. Akcham, Dr. Aleksanyan, but also Nanar Hartunian, Hasmik Bagdasarian, and Emily Pogosian. So thank you for your participation. We look forward to seeing you at our future events.
Thank you.